Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? And thank you for joining me. Welcome to another episode of Glam Metal 101, where we like to break down what it is that is glam metal and all the different defining things and just generally have some great conversations about it. So thanks for joining us. Got my co-host here, Chris Profi. How are you today?
Doing good. Good to see you.
Thanks for being here. And Rich Catino, how are you doing today?
Good. A little tired. We were talking off air. I've had a total metal meltdown this weekend because I went to Striper Friday at the Starland
Mhm.
Ballroom, right? And then
Yep.
last night was Maiden in Newark.
Yeah. So
So
awesome, man. That's the way to do it.
I'm all prime now. I'm
Yeah,
prime for the episode.
you are ready to go.
I'm ready to go, man.
Right. Well, that leads us to our topic today. So we're asking the question, who are the big four of glam metal? And the same sort of principle or approach that is the big four of thrash metal, we're thinking about that in terms of glam metal today. So who are the most defining bands? They don't necessarily have to be at the beginning, the quote originators or that sort of thing, but the four bands that define it, that are the ones that really carry the flag and that sort of stuff. And I think we're going to have some different opinions on this. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So I want to just dive into this and start with our number one, the big one. Who do we think is the first one in there? It would be the Metallica of glam metal, if you will, on it. And I want to just start off by there were certain bands that I had to rule out, ones that you guys might have in yours. But it's like, and we were talking, chatting earlier this morning about this, where it's like there's going to be some honorable mentions, there's going to be some, originators or the creators or the godfathers of, right? So I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel like Van Halen created glam metal, but they're not a glam metal band. They're the ones that set the blueprint and all of that. So I initially wanted to like put them in because they are that big. But I said, I don't really feel that they are that. They kind of came around and defined everything that set it up for everyone else. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I can totally agree with what you're saying, and I have quite a few bands that sort of fit that description as well. So, like you said, it's going to be interesting to kind of see who made the cut, who didn't,
Right.
who was very close,
Right.
and yeah. But I would agree with you about Van Halen.
Okay. And then I got one other one here. And again, this might appear in someone's here, and we'll have to see. Um, I still to this day will swear that this band is a glam metal band because that's how they started. And I'm talking about Guns N' Roses.
Hmm.
But I feel like they elevated out of being a glam metal band and just became a straight ahead rock band. They're too big almost for it. So I ruled them out as well. But to this day, like I said, I'll still call them a glam metal band. I still file them in my glam metal section.
Yeah. You
So I guess,
can't yeah, you can't deny, of course, appetite.
right,
But even though the Use Your Illusion album became a little more straight ahead, rock,
yeah,
hard rock,
right,
but they still had some, glam moments too. So
right,
to the present day, if we did something for the present day,
yeah,
Guns N' Roses would be one of them, the big
hmm,
four, if you want to go to the present. But since we're sticking with that '80s decade,
right.
changes a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, and so I mean, in that regard, I mean, we're really sticking with what I call the original era of it. So
Right.
it's basically the 81, 91, and
Yep.
some of it continued on to 92, 3, and 4,
Mhm.
but it's kind of the heyday, the original heyday.
Right. The
So
MTV era when they were
the
huge.
MTV era, exactly. So I mean,
Yeah.
Guns N' Roses still had to Use Your Illusion 1 and 2,
Right.
Lies, Appetite. I mean, I we could make a case that they should be in there at the number one slot. But I
Mhm.
also looked at this too and I said, most people don't consider them glam metal. And I'm talking about just the average people, the average fans kind of thing that don't know the history. We know that they started in late 85, 86,
Mhm.
had the glam look, had the glam sound, all of that sort of stuff, and classify as it, but they were also one of the ones that quickly peeled that stuff off too. Just went with the regular non-teased hair and
Mhm.
leather and jeans and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Another one that I really thought about putting in there, and they didn't start as glam metal, but I feel like they became poster boys for it, is Def Leppard.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Did
Absolutely.
either of you include them in the list?
No, and it's
Okay.
weird. I didn't even think about Def Leppard. But you're right. I mean, by the time Hysteria rolled around,
Yeah.
they were they were right in there. But I almost feel like I just kind of lumped them in with that new wave of British heavy metal thing, and then
Yeah.
they sort of worked their way into the glam
They
thing. But I don't,
totally did. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think that they started out with that intent to be, you
Right.
know, glam metal.
So how does this change our big four then? Because we all have a slightly different perspective on it. So I think maybe our big four is going to be different from each other.
I think that it is.
I think it is.
I
Yeah.
definitely think that it is, but I
Yeah.
am also surprised and not surprised that so far the three that I've ruled out, no one has said they've included, which is good, which I
Yeah.
think means we're thinking along the same lines. But I think there's some people out there that would have immediately said Van Halen, Def Leppard, Guns N' Roses, and so I wanted to knock some of those off. And the last one that I ruled out in the end was Bon Jovi,
Yeah.
because again, I didn't feel they started as glam metal, but they became that by Slippery When Wet in New Jersey, I think are two monumental glam metal
Huge.
albums, or at least of the
Huge.
sound. Yeah,
Yeah. Especially Slippery. Those three singles were on the radio in 86 and 87 every day on
Yeah.
MTV.
yeah. It's what started the whole pretty boy glam
Yeah.
metal thing, where Bon Jovi and his big smiling appearance on TV, whereas before that
Yeah.
it was the scowling,
Yeah.
metal artists that were started as metal that were
Yeah.
defining what would become glam metal. But
And
I,
Def Leppard too. Def Leppard with Hysteria in 87. That also. Them and Bon Jovi just opened the doors for radio to
yeah,
play all these bands.
yeah, right. And then of course Guns N' Roses Appetite. I mean, the '87
Afterwards,
year was
yeah.
huge and broke
Huge.
all that big, right?
Yeah.
So those were ones that I ruled out right away. So I guess I'll start in then. So my number one, the band that I think is the Metallica of glam, I'm going with Motley Crue. I think that those guys start in '81 and drop Too Fast for Love, which is picking up on the glam rock sound and a bit of the punk sound and all that. And I know they go through the more metal sounding stuff,
Yeah.
but with their next three albums, these here I think were absolute glam
Glam
metal,
metal. Yeah.
classics. And this is in '85. They're originators at this point, because the scene doesn't really kick off and start getting really big until '86. And then, as we pointed out, '87, the doors, the floodgates just wide open on the whole thing. But that's what I'm kicking off with. Where do you guys
Yeah.
feel both on Motley Crue, and at the same time, who did you select as your number one?
Well, who do you want me to go next?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So this was very difficult for me because I had a lot of ideas in my head about which bands I was going to put in,
Mhm.
and then I ended up taking them out. So I actually Googled the definition of glam metal, and it says a subgenre of heavy metal that features pop influence hooks, guitar riffs, upbeat rock anthems, power ballads. But then I started thinking about our last video,
Mhm.
subject matter for glam metal, partying, having a good time.
Yep.
I think the sound of the vocalist is a big thing for glam metal.
Mhm.
And there's that sleaze aspect to it.
Right.
Now, I did not include Motley Crue. I was going to. They're such a huge band, but here's why I didn't, because I
Okay.
feel like Motley Crue changed with every album. And
Yeah.
I will give it to you. This album is definitely glam. I feel like Shout at the Devil is not glam. I feel like this is
Metal.
straight up heavy metal.
Straight up heavy metal album.
Theater of Pain definitely is one of the ultimate glam albums. But then I feel like by Girls, 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 they were trying to strip sort of the glam image.
Yeah.
Look at that picture.
Right.
That's glam.
Yeah, and go to
Yeah.
like more of like a street image. So I mean, there's definitely an argument to say Motley Crue is one of the biggest glam metal, and it's hard to disagree with that, but I did not include them in my list. But my number one
Okay.
is Rat.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, here's why: because I don't think Rat strayed much from their glam metal sound with any of their albums. I feel like they always had that theme of partying having a good time. I also talked about the sound of the vocalist.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen Piercy just has like that ultimate glam, sleazy vocal quality. So
He's
I'm going with Rat as my number one.
No, I completely agree with you. And Rich, before we get into your number one, uh,
Yeah.
because you've mentioned Rat, Rat is my number two on
Yeah.
there. So I just want to spend a minute talking about Rat so we don't, circle back in there
Yeah.
on it. And certainly, Rich, if they appear in your countdown somewhere, let us know. But um, so I want to jump back real quick on the Motley Crue thing and the whole comment you made about the whole street image. I still feel like from about 88 to 91, 92, where that street image became a popular thing amongst Guns N' Roses, Motley Crue, LA Guns, a lot of those different bands, I still feel that's totally glam metal.
Yeah.
They stripped away the makeup, but the makeup fell off very fast for a lot of these bands post 87. So
Yep.
for me, I'm certainly not defining the glam metal genre, but also the big four as having to have the makeup look, which, as we know, set the tone and started all of this. But so I'm okay with bands that shifted to the street image. But Rat, you're 100% right. The only reason I didn't put Rat as number one is I just feel that Motley Crue is way bigger and always were. But to your point of the change, I feel like Motley Crue never chased trends with what they were doing. They were setting it. And so they set the sound and the change of what glam grew into. And so because each album was ahead of the curve in that regard, that's why I made them my number one. But you're right that Rat, the vocals, the lyrical content, musically not changing, just getting better with every album. Maybe it's the most consistent glam metal artist we'll talk about in this episode. Probably, in my opinion, even more consistent than Poison because I feel their albums changed.
Yeah.
But I could easily go with Rat in the number one spot. Rich, what's your take on Rat, and then tell us who your number one is at the same time.
This was tough because I flip-flop between Rat and Crue because they're both equally important because they both were around the same time, early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Rat was Mickey Rat before it was Rat. They both started in
78, right?
Yeah, 78, 79. So
before Motley Crue.
Right. Only a couple of years.
Yeah, and almost the same time frame as Van Halen. They were on the strip playing with Van Halen.
Right.
So it's like, I know. I thought about just going with like Formed, not going with first album. Because that's where I looked at like Motley Crue, and I said 1981, originators kind of thing. But
and what's interesting too is that Crue really broke out. I mean, they did with Shout at the Devil, but then they had the first power ballad before anybody that was huge, Home Sweet Home. Mm-hmm. But Rat had the two guitar players. Yes. So musically, they were better than Crue. DeMartini is just, it's DeMartini.
The
and Robin Crosby's riffs. Yeah, the dual, when they played together too, the harmony. So this was tough, but since we're calling it the Big Four,
right,
which considers more about the numbers, I think, and how much you sold, right?
Yeah.
I went with Crue too.
Yeah.
Instead of Rat. But if I had to pick, man, now my other three, it's tough because now I might wait until we get to the other three. I don't know. But Crue, all right, I have Crue at one because I think they were always sound-wise, even though they went more street with a couple albums, and then they went really glam with Theater of Pain.
Mm-hmm.
Influence, sales, music videos, everything. I think Crue is definitely part of the Big Four. Yeah. And then Rat's my tier two. I have a list. I'm looking at it. I have a tier two.
Yeah.
Who's right there. Four hugely important bands that we could talk about after.
Okay.
That are right underneath my Big Four because they're no less important and they're as important. Just as not Big Four material because of sales and recognition.
Yeah. I put together a list of 13. And we talked about, I guess we talked about four of them off of there, the ones that I ruled out. So then I'm down to 9, with what's left, trying to pare that down into, just 4 of these. And I've got some smaller bands that don't make my list, but maybe it'll make yours, and or we'll talk about it at the very end.
Okay.
Dangerous Toys, your shirt being one of them there, you
Yeah.
know. Absolutely fantastic
Yeah.
glam metal band, those first two albums, but did they define it? Are they worthy of being at the top of the list?
They
No, I
came too
don't think
late.
so.
That was the
Yeah.
thing.
And they really kind of come along too late in the scene to do that. But I have a couple I want to touch on right now. I'm going to wait on it, that didn't come around until the last year or two, and I still think they made huge impacts. So we'll talk about that later if nobody mentions them.
Okay.
All
All
right.
right. So since I went first on this last one here, and Chris, you did not. Your number one became our, or at least it's not our number one in here. Tell us what your number two is, and let's see where we fall.
All right. So my number two is going with sales and sound and everything too, but it's also a sentimental value for me because it was the first concert I ever saw, and I'm talking about Poison.
I knew you were going there. I was just waiting for it. I was like, yeah.
I mean, you know, glam metal, you cannot talk about glam metal without Poison. I mean, look at the cover of that first album.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
even their second album has one of the biggest ballads ever. Every Rose Has Its Thorn.
Mm-hmm.
You know, glam. I look at these guys
on the
back.
debut. It was still a big single.
Yeah, and you know, I was talking about bands that sort of changed their sound. By Flesh and Blood, they were starting to change their sound, but they still had the look.
Yep.
And they also
Not
still
the
had the
hair,
single.
though. They kind of toned that down.
Yeah.
Well,
but they also had the single "Unskinny Bop," which I think is a total glam song.
But it's horrendous. It's their worst song ever. It's as
bad as I like it.
It's as bad as Cherry Pie. I can't do either one of them.
Oh, I think
horrendous.
The worst lyrics. I love the music. I don't have an issue with that part, but the lyrics, which make no sense in my mind, it's just nonsense.
I think it's dumb.
I don't know. There's just something about that bass intro. Dum, 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 dum. I don't know. I like the song. It's sort of you know, it doesn't mean anything, but it's a fun song.
Well, that's all it was ever meant to be, and that I think is a key point to Poison. And interestingly, the fact that they're your number two, they're my number three. So, see where we're going with this, right? But I put them in there because they, in my opinion, are the ultimate party rock band.
Yeah.
And if we were just going on a band that flies the flag for it, that is representative, that had the look and was always that, I would have even said maybe Poison should be at the top. But then I would be saying the bands that would really be coming after it might be more in the sleaze rock vein than just the bigger, broader picture of glam metal kind of thing. But they're quintessential. I don't think we could have a top four list without Poison. And the question really just becomes, where in the list do they come in? Because when you guys find out what my number four band is, they've been around longer and as long as, you know, Motley Crue and stuff. And it's like, but they weren't as big, right?
Yeah.
So I chose to move Poison from the fourth slot, even though they came around later and all that sort of stuff, up higher. And the thing is, I think if we looked at album sales overall, I think Poison has sold more than Rat. So you could even make the case that they should be above it. But I do look at who was an originator, who started it, who, like you said, Chris, was most consistent in it and all of that. And for me, Rat sits above Poison in that regard. But man, Poison just, to this day, they are still out there flying the flag for glam metal prouder than anyone, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look at the name of their single, "Talk Dirty to Me." I mean,
right. I think there it is.
Yeah. You know, you can't get much more glam than that.
Right. That covers all the bases.
Yeah.
Rich, how do you feel about Poison? Considering how much you don't like Unskinny Bop.
Do you want to know where they're in my ranking? Well, we're at number two, so I'm not going to say where, but I do have them here in my pile. So yeah, I love the first album. Yeah. I like the next one too, as well as much. I like more of their deeper cuts, like Want Some, Need Some, and Number One Bad Boy, and the heavier stuff. What's on the second album?
Oh, I mean,
Rocking Horse. What's the other one?
I love Fallen Angel, but
Yeah,
Tear Down the Walls.
you can look, but you can't touch. What's the other song on that
I
one?
like Love on the Rocks.
Love on the Rocks. Yeah, like I like more of their rock and heavier, more metal riff songs, but they're in there somewhere. So they're not my number two though.
Okay, so what's your number two?
My number two. Ready? You guys sitting down?
I am. Oh,
All right. But number two.
Yeah,
Oh,
because if you think about it, Runaway was 84. In and Out of Love is 85. Only Lonely. Like
yeah.
even when you look at their photography then, they were glam metal.
Yes. I
They were
don't.
doing it. They were glammy as well as everybody else. And they had the riffs, they had the solos, they
Right.
had the hooks. And this is 84, 85 for these albums.
Yeah.
So these are important to the evolution of glam metal,
But
right?
why are they not at your number one then? If we're talking about how
Because
big album sales alone.
Crew predates them.
Okay.
And that Sunset Strip thing too.
Yeah,
But,
I know. I looked at that too.
right.
Who's from Hollywood, who's from LA.
Yeah. But then, you get to Slippery, and that's where we're saying it breaks open the doors. Huge on the radio, pop radio, everything. The singles were huge. But I think these are just very influential, important, metal riff based, with pops, hooks.
Very pop sensible.
Go back and look at the videos for Only Lonely and In and Out of Love.
Even Runaway, as
Yeah,
metal as
Runaway
that
too.
was, look at
Yeah.
Jon Bon Jovi in it, singing and strutting for the
Yeah,
camera.
they were absolutely glam metal. Even though after Keep the Faith in 91, 92, 93, by the time you get to these days, he abandoned all that. He thought he cut his hair. He wasn't doing that style anymore.
Right.
But for the decade we're talking about, the big four, as we're calling it, they were massive and huge and the biggest, aside from Crew. So they have to be in there for me.
I could easily go with having, like I said, I mean, I ruled them out of mine, but I could even have them in it. I definitely think that Jon Bon Jovi did more for the glam metal scene with his pretty boy looks than any other artist out there, even Bret Michaels for that matter, because Bret Michaels, it was all teased hair and makeup and everything, whereas Jon Bon Jovi just came out and he just looked good. He looked the part.
Yeah, they all did. They all did. But Sambora's riffs and his solos are so massive. They're awesome. They were not light. They weren't pop. They were pretty heavy sometimes, So,
well, also,
Bon Jovi, without a doubt.
They had the element of keyboard in there as well.
Yes, which was different from everybody else.
That's true. That's true. That definitely gave them a more pop sensible sound to them with that the keyboards in there.
Yeah. No, I mean Slippery When Wet is right in there with ultimate glam metal album. So they're not in my big four, but I can see why you put them in your big four. Right.
Yeah. Because we're talking about that decade, like we said. And this is the big four for that decade. We're not looking to the present and who still does it today.
Right.
That's from the originators. But for originators and importance and their time period, definitely Bon Jovi.
Yeah. Well, Rich, go ahead and tell us your number three then.
Your number three is Poison.
Oh, okay. All right.
Because like I said, I love this first album. I like the second one. I like Flesh and Blood too. Even Native Tongue is great, even though it's a bluesy rock record,
Yeah.
Well, Poison sold so many records. They were so important. They were all over MTV.
That was something I was going to make a comment on them, is that they also changed their sound, but they did it in a way that brought the glam metal fans along. They didn't change it to something night and day different. And they were a bit of, forward thinkers too, in terms of bringing the more bluesy Southern rock sounding stuff out of the music. The way that Cinderella and some of these other bands had been doing stuff like that.
Yeah. So, you can hear it on Flesh and Blood. There's a couple bluesy songs on there. I forgot the titles, but they started it there.
Yeah. Well, you have Strange Days of Uncle Jack.
Yeah.
And Valley of Lost Souls on the end of it. Right. So, Rich, then, since we've now run through your number twos and threes, see if your number four surprises us.
I'm going with, like I said, the same thinking.
Okay.
Who sold the most? Who was the biggest hits, the most important, influential is absolutely Def Leppard.
Okay. All right.
Look at Pyromania, dude. Pyromania, right? Those 3 singles alone.
You mean on Hysteria or?
I mean, duh. See, that's what happens when you have too much metal in one weekend.
Yeah.
The long album, Pyromania, those 3 singles alone, huge for the genre.
Right.
Even though they weren't in makeup, they were more, jeans and denim and leather at the time. Hysteria got more fashionable, but musically,
but they also got more
Photograph Foolin' and Rock of Ages, perfect, right? Glam metal songs.
And they might be the most commercial of all of them, even more so than Bon Jovi. With what Mutt Lange was able to do to them in terms of production, because that was also the start of it, where prior to this, it's metal bands, and what metal bands, they didn't have overly ornate productions and things like that. And to bring that in on heavy metal is where I think it made the transition to what becomes glam metal, because of that melodic commercial aspect.
Always cite Pyromania, the production of it. But he still had harder songs that were metal too, like Rock Till You Drop and Stage Fright and Coming Under Fire, right? Die Hard the Hunter. This wasn't like light pop rock. It was just, not high and dry new wave of British heavy metal, but more into the catchy riffs, big hooks, but they weren't light riffs. They weren't poppy, even though the hooks were kind of a little bit poppy, right?
Yeah.
So definitely a metal record before Hysteria comes out, because that's when you really get that big glossy finish. So,
and of course they had a ton of the ballads and everything too. So they were one of those bands that really pushed that stuff early on as well.
Yeah. So that's my 4.
All right. So, nice. Chris, what is your number 4?
Well, I didn't give my number 3 yet. Do you want me to give my?
No, yes, please. I thought.
All right. So my number 3 is Cinderella.
Okay, yeah.
And it's funny here. I almost didn't put Cinderella in because, well, here's the thing. They're one of my favorite bands. That's not the reason. The reason is because I feel like they sort of left the glam thing after this first album, and the look for them actually was more glam than the sound of the album. I think that album was very heavy. But the singles, Somebody Save Me, Shake Me, Nobody's Fool, and then, Long Cold Winter, they still had the look. I guess they went more for like a street sort of look for it. But you've got the ballad, Don't Know What You've Got Till It's Gone on here. Coming Home is on here. They did get bluesy with the title track. But, even with Heartbreak Station, it's more of a country Rolling Stones sounding album.
Yeah.
But they still had the glam image and still some of the glam sound. So I got to put Cinderella in there. It's one of my favorite bands. And, I think they definitely did something for the genre.
Absolutely. I have them on my list of 13. They don't make my number 4 slot. But hands down, they're definitely a contributor. I mean, that album is 1986. It's the same year as Look What the Cat Dragged In from Poison. The album is heavier than the look of that, but I still think that it's still full on glam sounding.
Totally is.
And I think the next 2 albums are still full on glam sounding. Glam, in my mind, has a much wider sound to it than just poppy, stuff. And I definitely think the blues undertones from bands like Cinderella and even Great White and stuff like that, think are part of it. And because they have the look and the ballads and some of that other stuff, I fully agree with you. I could easily have Cinderella in my list.
Yeah. Now, my number 4 is sort of a dark horse pick.
Okay.
I think I kind of, obviously I stayed clear from like the Def Leppards and the Bon Jovis and all that.
Yeah.
And I agree everything with your points. But for my number 4, I'm going Faster Pussycat.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when we're talking glam, Faster Pussycat with like Bathroom Wall, Don't Change That Song, Cat House, and we were talking about selling albums. Well, Wake Me When It's Over
Mhm.
sold a crap load of copies because of House of Pain.
Yeah.
Which
Great
was
song.
a huge ballad for them. But
Yeah.
they kept the glam thing going even with their album Whipped.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Nonstop to Nowhere on here, Big Dictionary.
Body Talk.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Did they sell as much as Poison and Def Leppard and Bon Jovi? No, but when we're talking glam metal, for me,
Mhm.
I think they're just for me they've got to obviously be in the top four.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to, for me, and I have been looking at it definitely in terms of influence and sales and stuff like that.
Yeah,
They did not make my list of 13, but I
yeah,
could totally
Yeah.
see that.
yeah,
Um, my only issue for them is the album that they did in the early 2000s, Power in the Glory Hole, the
yeah,
industrial metal album.
yeah.
Immediately would wipe them off of my list. Any band that is going to make a night and day 180 degrees something other than the style, I don't know.
Right, right.
Sounds like
We're talking about that decade though, the 80s.
well, no, I'm just saying bands that were from the decade,
Oh.
not bands that didn't continue on.
Oh,
So,
okay.
but it's not why I ruled them out. I mean,
Yeah.
to be honest, Faster Pussycat didn't pop into my head. Dangerous Toys didn't pop into my head. But
Yeah.
then once I hit the list of 13, I was like, I
Yeah.
can't even add any more to this. Like, I need to
Yeah.
stop because I've already, trying to figure out how to pick only 4 out of that was going to be a nightmare for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so many bands I wanted to put in there, and here's the thing: maybe if you asked me a week from now, my list would change.
Right.
And I'm after what you guys were saying before, I'm almost thinking maybe I should have put Crew in my list, but that's the thing. Like I feel like there were so many great bands; they brought so many different things that my list would. If you ask me 3 hours from now, I might change up a couple things. So,
I put my list together last weekend.
Yeah.
After mulling over it for like a week before when we first decided we were going to do this episode. And I looked back at it this morning and couldn't make a case to change one of these bands out of there. But, I sort of just had to resolve myself that I've only got 4 and these are the 4 kind of things. So
what I am surprised at, and I don't know did you give your number 4 yet?
I have not yet.
But
did you give your 3 too?
I gave my 3. Yeah.
Okay.
Poison.
So none of us have shown Dokken.
Well, that's in my tier 2, which is like I said, so close.
And
that's your 4?
So this is these are my number 4 pick is Dokken, and I have to say that I'm absolutely shocked that none of you guys picked them. I really thought they were the one that kept going in and out of my collection, and I actually had in as my number 4 originally LA Guns. But I looked at who I thought was more influential, who had the more sales, who had the bigger hits, all that sort of stuff. And ultimately I said, you know what? I got to go Dokken. Yeah. And then I debated back and forth because see, Dokken, 1981, before Poison, but I felt Poison did more for the genre and is bigger and has continued it on and flown the flag that I decided.
Because we're talking about the big 4, like we're saying.
Yeah, so I moved them up in the list and I decided to put Dokken at the number 4 slot. But I mean, every album had hits on it. And while the albums weren't as big as some of the other artists, they looked the part, they had the hits. Those songs are still played on every Hair Nation and glam metal, show that is out there. And people still talk about George Lynch, and we all lose our shit when Don Dokken's dropping a new Dokken album. And, so I think for me, at least, they've got to be in there. And that's why I popped them in at number 4.
They're equally as important. That's why I had that tier 2 that I have that are right below the big 4, because we're terming it the big 4 because that's the biggest bands who had the biggest, the biggest sales, the biggest hits, the most popular. So that's how that worked in. But I think my tier 2 is is so damn close, and there's equally as important if we get to those next.
So where did White Lion fit in there for you guys?
They didn't for me, but that's because of the lyrical content. And
you wouldn't consider them glam?
No, I consider them a glam metal band, absolutely. Yeah. But they are so outside what glam metal is. They had the look.
Yeah.
The music is slower often. The lyrical stuff was often more real and had, political side of things, or deeper, or that sort of stuff.
Definitely a little more mature.
Mature, yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I wouldn't have considered them in that regard.
What about Warrant?
They came a little too late for me.
Yeah, I don't know. They definitely deserved a seat at the table. And that's where, when I had LA Guns in there at the start of it, I said, well, Warrant is bigger, but I don't really want to put Warrant on there, and that's when I had to back it up. And I said, well, then Dokken's bigger than Warrant, and they should be on there. But I thought Slaughter also deserved a spot, because even though this album comes out in 1990 and then 92, it's huge. And in an era when glam was dying off, I feel they did more for the genre, because they were completely unapologetic about it. I mean, his vocals alone, it's like you cannot disguise that as anything but glam metal sound.
Yeah.
And,
they were very important for the last wave, I think. Maybe the most important. Because remember, they were opening up for Kiss in arenas off that first album.
Another band that I think did a lot for it, and they were the final movement of it, 1990 again and 92, was Firehouse.
Especially those first two albums. That guitar sound on those two records is so crunchy and heavy. It's great.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to hear our different viewpoints and to see kind of what angle we're coming at it as, because I was thinking, we're saying the big four. So going to, like, I know this is not thrash, but if we talk about Metallica, Anthrax, Megadeth, Slayer, there's a lot of people who would say, oh, I want to swap out, Death Angel, or I want to put Exodus in there, or Overkill. So,
Testament.
Testament. Absolutely. So
I
think you can make an argument for a lot of these bands, and we're talking about glam, but it's the same sort of thing. Like, we could swap out some and put other ones in, and it kind of just depends on what angle you're going at it as.
Like my tier 2.
Yeah,
which I think is, like I said, is equally important. Maybe not as big as sales, recognition, things like that. But the other 4, I actually have 5, is depending on how I put in my Rat. If I swap out my Motley Crue, that's tough. Right. So it's Rat, absolutely Wasp.
Yeah. See,
absolutely.
I need to bring that in. And I just never felt they're glam metal. They are full on heavy metal. They're nothing.
First album, but when you get to Last Command, Inside the Electric Circus, you get more glam metal in there. I think they're very important for the scene and for the LA. So Rat, Wasp, absolutely Dokken. Striper is extremely important. Yellow Black Pack, Soldiers Under Command, To Hell with the Devil.
I think
even though the lyrics
are metal, I don't think there's any.
I know the lyrics are different, but musically, and the harmonies and the hooks, very important. And of course, Great White.
Yeah.
First album came out in 83, I think, right? 82, 83.
Yeah. I would agree 100% with Great White. They're another one of those bands that, like Guns N' Roses, Def Leppard, Bon Jovi, that people will argue till they're blue in the face that they're not a glam metal band, that they're a hard rock blues band or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'll call them a glam metal band till the day I die. I think they absolutely are. But I just thought, it's too divisive or whatever. It's like I want to go with bands. I decided I'm going to go with bands that I think really are, and most people would not argue with you, are glam metal in that regard. But Great White, yes, huge. Once Bitten and Twice Shy, those 2 albums alone, and not to mention Booked.
Yeah.
Where
I think Striper, you can't count out Striper, because even though the lyrics are about God and praising the Lord and all that, musically and hooks, singable qualities, the thing, and some of the fashion, of course, Striper has to be in there. They're very important.
Where would you guys put?
Hang on a second. I don't think they're glam at all. I think they're
Yeah.
100% a metal band.
Just a regular metal band?
Just a straight on metal band.
I mean, I've always considered them that too, but musically, if you put them on Hair Nation, even
Not
the
until
Deep Cuts channel, they blend in well with everybody else. So it's
not until what was the album with the title Law, Under the Law or something like that?
Against the
Against
Law.
Against the Law. That
Yeah.
to me, that was the first time that they had a more glam metal sound to them than the straight up metal sound.
I actually thought "In God We Trust" because
Yeah.
Always There for You" is such a pop song.
But then for me, but then also, like I said, I don't think of Wasp as glam metal. And I know in our previous video, you also threw out Twisted Sister, and I don't think they're glam metal either. I think they're just a metal band. So
I put them in the Godfathers, them and
yeah,
Quiet Riot, because them and Quiet Riot, of course, had their huge hits for that one album, right? For Stay Hungry and Metal Health. So another band, two bands that are very important. I don't know if they're big 4-tier levels, right? But they're, very important too.
I think they certainly have their place and certainly expanded the genre. I mean, without Metal Health going to #1 as the first metal album and all of that. And they were definitely more pop metal than straight on metal. I get all of that.
And
in terms of what I think of, and Chris, what you mentioned at the top of the episode as to what sort of defines it, they didn't have the lyrical content, and they didn't have some of that other stuff that defined what I think of when I think of glam metal. And so,
Quiet Riot or Twisted Sister?
All of them.
Oh, really?
Striper, Twisted Sister, Wasp, Quiet Riot. That's why I have never considered them in those categories at all. But in terms of the bigger picture of metal becoming commercial and metal breaking through, whether it goes in as the glam metal, which has really became the most commercial part of metal for the decade, they all definitely have their place as bands that influenced it, making it more popular.
The problem is that Quiet Riot and Twisted Sister, after their big hit albums, they had two clunkers. Quiet Riot had a QR3, which was not the greatest, and then Kevin DuBrow Leaves.
Right.
Twisted Sister did come out and play, which their two singles were horrendous. Be Cool to Your School and the cover of
Leader of the Pack.
Leader of the Pack.
Yeah, Leader of the Pack were awful. So, and those bands broke up. So that's why they don't make our big four list. But equally, again, two albums for both bands, equally important. So,
Chris, you were going to say something. I didn't really mean to cut you off there, but I had to get that in because I don't know. I just feel so against it.
Yeah, no, that's fine because it was funny because I was going to mention Twisted Sister and then you just mentioned Twisted Sister.
Okay.
Because I was going to ask what you guys thought about them, but you've told me. But I'm going to kind of side with Rich on the Striper thing. I think with To Hell with the Devil and In God We Trust.
Yeah.
And even into Against the Law, I think they definitely had a glam sound. I mean, I think
vocals for me mostly from him that has that more power metal sound to it.
Yeah, and I can hear what you're saying with the metal because their earlier albums, well, even on To Hell with the Devil, they have some
Black Attack.
Yeah, they have some straight up metal songs, but
totally.
They definitely, with their ballads and their look and their solos and the pop sensibility, I mean, you can make an argument for them for glam.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people would. One band that we didn't mention, and this is again another one, and the final one that I'm going to talk about here, that I will die on the fence that they're a glam metal band. I have a lot of them, and we didn't discuss them at all. But Skid Row. And if nothing else, I think this album here alone, even because a lot of people will agree that this was glam metal, but then they, grew out of it.
Just regular heavy metal, yeah.
I think this debut album, which sold 5 million copies in the U.S., I wanted to put them on there, but again, as a band that is so divisive in terms of who people think where they come from, I chose to leave them off from it. But I don't know. How do you guys feel about them? Do you consider them glam metal?
I did not put them in my list because I feel like Skid Row is the tale of two bands. Like you said, that first album is total glam.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the second album, Slave to the Grind, they just stripped that away and went pure metal.
Right.
So I don't know. I I would consider that first album, but then it's strange because then they just stripped that away and went total metal. Because then by Subhuman Race, they were bringing in like grunge and industrial elements and everything too.
Yeah.
Rich? But you can definitely make a case for that first album.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with the Skid Row first album. Who was the other band, Brendan, that I agreed with you? That came later. Oh, them, Slaughter.
Yeah.
The first Winger album were important for the last wave, right?
Yeah, I can't even believe no one mentioned Winger in all of this.
That. Yeah. But you know who else are two bands real quick that I think are important to the early days too? Not big four material, but still important is absolutely Kicks.
Yes.
The first two albums came out in 82, 83, I want to say.
Yep.
Night Ranger, their first two albums.
I always saw more melodic rock.
They were, but they were huge for this kind of a sound, right? With the big hooks and the guitars, the riffs, right?
Yeah.
Who else? I put down for that are important. Oh, Aldo Nova too, with Fantasy. You know, as far as like an influence, you know what I mean?
Okay. Influenced Bon Jovi, if nothing else. So we got
that sound too. And then of course Europe, who started out, you know, heavy metal, but then they got the Final Countdown and Out of This World. So again, not a band that's terribly considered glam, but sound wise, musically, they're in the family too.
Certainly, a huge album.
Where would Kiss fall in all this?
If you wanted to say originators, but I don't think so because they go back to the glam rock scene. They're from the 70s. It's sort of like Van Halen. They predate it. Yeah. Certainly they influence it, but they're a band that changed and made albums from all the different genres and then jumped on glam metal making it. They were never really glam metal, you know. Yeah. So that's why I don't even discuss them. I don't even say that they influence it, but of course they did. I mean, Ted Nugent, who is not a glam metal person in any way, shape, or form, and AC/DC certainly influenced glam metal.
Aerosmith. I mean, Aerosmith, you know, Cinderella is like the sons of Aerosmith at points, right?
Exactly. So, all right. So that's our big four, plus a whole plethora of other bands in there.
So many other topics that we can discuss, right?
Exactly. But this was good because we were all pretty general around the top 4 or 5, give or take, that we could swap in, swap one out. But we were all pretty much right there with it, even based on ones I rolled out, you had in, and vice versa. So I think, we could make a case for any of those as the big 4, certainly. But it's been interesting, all the different second tier or supporting bands that came along that we didn't even think, some of us didn't even think about until getting into this conversation. And then it's like, oh my God, how did we leave them out, right? Yeah. So those of you watching, certainly chime in with your list of big 4, but also what is that one outlier, that 5th one that you would throw in that maybe no one's thought of here, right? And let's see what that list provides for us. So as we wrap up here, Chris, what's coming up on your channel in the next few days or coming weeks that you want to share with everyone?
Probably doing some more album reviews. I just I bought the new Cure record, so I want to talk about that album.
Because that's
I know you did a review on that. Yeah, I want to kind of go back.
My review.
What'd you say?
So people hate my review.
Well, yeah, I don't think you were a big fan of the album, but
not a fan of it. Not a big fan at all. But I still like the album, and I still love the band. I think it was a very objective review, but man.
Yeah,
I'm the complete antithesis of what everyone else is feeling.
I also want to kind of go back to, I was going back into, and you were doing this as well. I feel like I'm like doing a lot of your videos, but albums where that I like that a lot of other people don't like. I was pulling some of those out. I also have some, constantly buying CDs. So I've got a stack of CDs that I want to show off as well. So, we all kind of do the same thing.
Yeah, just with our own personal spin.
Yeah, put our own personal spin. But yeah, so CD reviews, album reviews, and I've got some other, album battles that I'll be doing as well.
Okay. And Rich, what do you have coming down the line?
My Striper and Maiden concert reviews will go up probably at Brave Words.
Okay.
I'll share it to Metal Asylum and the Metal Hall of Fame, which I also contribute to. And then I got Wasp in a week and a half. They're going to be in the area. They're going to be in New York and PA. So I'm going to do one of those shows. So I'll have pictures from that. they're going to be with Armored Saint. So that'll be going up at those 3 places that I contribute to too.
Nice.
Very cool. And
Yeah.
their Wasp is performing their first album in its entirety on this tour, which is also
Yeah.
very cool.
Yep. And some other hits from the 80s too. So it's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, and then over here on my channel, much like what Chris said, you know, we all kind of do very similar stuff, and I have been doing the favorite unpopular album series as well as hated albums in my music collection, which seems to have spurred on a lot of other videos and things from people that are countering my view of that, having just posted one today on comparing the albums of Metallica, because I put in the most recent one, Saint Anger being one of those hated albums, even though, yeah, I have it in the collection. I try to listen to it. I've been trying for 20 years to get into that album. It hasn't really worked for me, but I do see the power in it. Either way, though, got that stuff coming down the line, and certainly always got a bunch of videos that I filmed with Anthony at Sound Exchange, so those are also coming down the line as well. But everyone, for tuning in, thanks for checking this out, and we hope to continue the series down the line. And the topic things that came up in today's, I think, may present itself for episodes down the line. We'll have to wait and see what comes out of this. But for Chris and Rich, I'm Brendan. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.